Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Meetinghouse of Provincetown, where we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and where we support each other on our spiritual search for truth and meaning. My name is Rev Kate Wilkinson, and I am so glad that you are with us this morning. Welcome to those of you in the room, and welcome also to those of you joining us from home via our YouTube live stream. We hold on our hearts this morning our music director, Mary Apt, whose sister passed away this week. We surround the whole family in love and care as they grieve. This morning, we have a guest music director who was able to step in at the last minute, and she just happens to be my mother. So, welcome, Lynn. Thank you. Today is our pandemic anniversary service, and we'll be thinking about that weekend 3 years ago when the world went into lockdown and our lives changed so significantly. And we'll be looking at the intervening years and what they've been like and what we've learned. But before we continue our worship, we have just a few announcements to share with you. On Sunday, April 23rd, we will gather on Zoom at 2 o'clock for a congregational talk soup meeting. That's what we call it when we gather to talk about something. The topic next month will be the proposed 8th principle of Unitarian Universalism. We will get to vote that day as a congregation on whether we want to adopt that 8th principle. So in preparation, please watch or rewatch the sermon that I gave on this subject back in January. If you search, that service title is MLK Sunday, and I'll also send that out as a link to our email list. Tomorrow is our last Soul Collage workshop at 2:30 in the afternoon here at the Meetinghouse. You don't have to have attended the first two to join us. This is the final offering of our Winter Spirituality series. We've got all the supplies. You just need to come with an open mind and a willingness to discover some new things about yourself. A reminder that we have reduced office hours right now at the Meetinghouse. We have volunteers covering the office on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays from 11 to 2, closed on Wednesdays. So please call ahead before coming by. And thank you so much to our office volunteers. You guys are great. And finally, we invite those of you who are here in person today to stay after worship for coffee hour downstairs in Acker Bosworth Hall, directly after the service. Join us for coffee and good conversation. And of course, all of you are welcome to our midweek online coffee hour on Zoom Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Let's take a moment now to affirm our Meetinghouse covenant. I will say a line, and then you can say it back to me. Love is the spirit of this Meetinghouse. This is our great covenant. To dwell together in peace. To seek the truth in love. And to help one another. Now, as we light our chalice here in the sanctuary, I invite those of you joining us from home to light a candle wherever you are. In that way, we can feel together even while we are apart. And I invite Ellen and Jan to light our chalice this morning.
Thinking particularly of our folks watching online this morning, we light our chalice with words by Laura Thompson. Across the distance, the light from within me shines, sending love to all. Across the distance, your light is fuel that warms me and helps to keep my own light burning. Together, we keep the flame of community burning bright.
Thank you. Please join me now in a time of meditation and prayer. During our prayer or at any time during the service, you are welcome to light a silent candle at the table to the right of the pulpit, and there is a journal there to record your thoughts and prayers. After the prayer, we will sing together Spirit of Life, which is hymn number 123. You can also find the words to this song printed on the purple laminated cards in your pews. Our prayer this morning is by Gwen Matthews. Feel that. Each breath, every inhale, exhale, we are living, breathing, connected. We are the whole, complete, beautiful selves that we were born to be. Feel that in your bones, in your muscles, in your heart and your blood. That is the extraordinary you. The you who was born for this time, this place, this moment. Feel that. The struggle, the worry, the pain, the loss, the grief. It is still you. You are still whole, complete, beautiful, extraordinary. Feel that. Amen.
3 years ago, in the first days of the pandemic lockdown, back in March 2020, Lynn Unger, a UU minister, dog trainer, and little-known poet, sat down at the desk next to her kitchen table and began to type. A friend had posted something on Facebook about how much we need poetry in this anxious coronavirus age, and she thought, yeah, you're right. Lynn had been thinking about social distancing, the idea that to keep the virus from spreading, we needed to stay away from one another. How do we physically distance ourselves without emotionally distancing? And so, with her 2 Australian shepherds by her side, she spent a little while turning her thoughts into a poem. When she was done, she typed her name and the date at the bottom and posted it on Facebook for her small following of friends and colleagues. Within a few hours, her poem, Pandemic, went viral. The well-known writer, Rebecca Solnit, was among the thousands who shared it. Lynn was surprised, but also pleased. A viral poem about a virus. She said, that's funny in a twisted kind of way. Here's Lynn's poem. Pandemic by Lynn Unger. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel, cease from buying and selling. Give up, just for now, on trying to make the world different from what it is. Sing, pray, touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down, and when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely that has become clear. Do not reach out your hands. Reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we all shall live.
Now is the time in our service where we take an offering to support the shared ministry of this congregation. You can give online through Venmo or PayPal. Information for giving online is at our website, uumh.org. And here in the sanctuary, I am told we only need 3. I invite 3 volunteer ushers forward to take our collection as the choir rises to sing. On and off-site, your offerings will now be gratefully received.
And we will care for each other as the world around us unravels, and we will tend to the spark of hope that lives within our grieving hearts. And we are here now in this present moment, lifting our voices and hearts. And we are here now, we have come together, we are tending the spark of hope only grow, and we will care for each other as the world around us unravels, and we will tend to the spark of hope that lives within our grieving hearts. And we are here now in this present moment, lifting our voices and hearts. And we are here now, we have come together, we are tending the spark of hope only grow, and we are care for each other as the world around us unravels, and we will tend to the spark of hope that lives within our grieving hearts. And we are here now in this present moment, lifting our voices and hearts. And we are here now, we have come together, we are tending the spark of hope only grow, and we will care for each other.
Thank you. Before I begin my sermon, I'd like to dedicate today's service to our beloved Gail Barrett, who died of COVID on May 30th, 2020. Let's pause for a moment of silence in her honor. Thank you. It's so hard to believe that this week marks 3 years since the pandemic changed our lives. At times it feels like yesterday. At times it feels like it has been 10 years, uphill both ways. What I know is that we did not all experience the pandemic in the same way. Some of us got very sick, and some of us didn't. Some of us lost loved ones who will never be returned to us, and some of us didn't. Some of us worked high-risk jobs, while some of us got to stay home. Some of us had space to spread out, and some of us were cooped up with our families in small apartments. Some of us had pre-existing conditions that made the pandemic an even more fearful time. People kept trying to bond us together by saying that we are all in the same boat. But that just wasn't true. We were all in different boats, but we were in the same storm. And now some of us feel like the storm is over, and some of us are still in it every day. I don't think we are anywhere close to having processed what these last 3 years have meant, or how we've been changed, or how society has changed, or what the new normal is. In 2021, quotations.com published this aspirational postcard, and it felt really true for a minute. I remember that minute. It was the beginning of summer 2021, just more than a year after the pandemic began, and we thought it was coming to a close. I loved this postcard and bought many copies. It says, "This year, let's stay at home some more, just to be sure it's safe to venture out all willy-nilly again. Once we're sure, let's hug, and then hug some more, and visit each other's homes and stay for as long as we want. Let's go out and eat indoors, and get haircuts, and take the subway to wherever we want to go. Let's travel further than where the subway can take us. Let's exchange unmasked smiles with strangers on the street. Let's run to the grocery store just to pick up that one item that we need, and end up wandering around for hours, trying all the free samples. Let's go see a movie or a show in an actual theater with lots of other people doing the same thing. Let's go sit at a coffee shop. Let's stop worrying as much. Let's stop having nightmares in which we forget our masks. Let's put our mask collections up high on a shelf along with all the other things we don't expect to need anytime soon. Let's go to a wedding and a birthday dinner and a dance party. Let's go stand in the middle of a crowd just for a moment, just because we can. Let's smush our faces real close together and whisper secrets in each other's ears. Let's share meals again. This year, let's still write cards to each other and call to check in. Let's still go on walks together around the neighborhood. When the world starts turning faster and faster again, let's take time to sit still and sleep in and stay in and say no when we want to. Let's continue to wash our hands. Let's not forget all the hard-earned lessons of last year, and forevermore be grateful and more aware of what actually matters and more able to let go of what doesn't. This year, let's hold on ever so tightly to each other, and then a bit tighter still. I remember that minute. That was the minute when we thought we could hang on to all the good lessons of the pandemic and let go of the hurtful ones. That was the minute when we thought we could go right back to all the things that we missed with a new appreciation for them that would last forever. But before I could send out even one of these postcards, July came. And Provincetown hit the news as the epicenter of breakthrough COVID cases, COVID that spread like wildfire even amongst those who had been vaccinated. And so it was back to social distancing and masking and fearing and worrying, except that this time, over a year in, we were no longer in it together. Factions were forming. Some people were done with cautionary measures, unwilling to put life on pause any longer. And those of us who had trained our brains that social distancing and masking were the markers of community mindedness became judgmental of others who were no longer doing so. Rifts began to form between political parties, but also in families, in church communities. Instead of being a joyous time, it was another hard time. Only now we were tired. So tired. And we had to grapple with the ways in which the world had changed and the ways in which it had not changed. And we had to face things that were revealed to us during the pandemic. We had to figure out how to move on. In a way, we are still in that phase of things. Figuring out what we have learned, figuring out how to move on. I don't know if you saw it, but AARP magazine summed things up this month in an article called 3 Years Later, What We Learned from COVID. I found it interesting. They said that although the vast majority of those who died from COVID were over 65, overall, older people fared better during the pandemic than younger people. I mean, chances are they didn't have to live 24/7 in a 3-room apartment with a toddler, right? And they didn't have to force their depressed teenager to attend Zoom school or wear 2 layers of PPE just to go to work every day. So perhaps overall, older people's lives were a little less changed than their younger counterparts during this time. Not easy, but not as radical a shift. What we learned, the article said, is that the older generations had the experience, resources, and resilience to ride out this storm better than middle-aged and younger generations. For older adults, fear of death has dropped and happiness has risen. In fact, about 2 in 3 of the oldest adults, 80 and older, say they are living their best life possible. And now the exception to this is older people living on their own, for whom loneliness and isolation became a very real pandemic challenge. Even though we don't talk about them much, it seems like maybe teenagers fared the worst during the pandemic. They lost crucial social milestones and experiences. They lost learning time. They lost the ability to interact with others with ease. And will they ever look up from their devices again? Screen time is off the charts for all of us. The average time a U.S. adult spent looking at a screen each day increased 60 to 80% during the pandemic. But this was even more true for younger folks. And in 2021, the U.S. Surgeon General declared a mental health crisis among young people. And we don't really know what the pandemic has done to younger children. I think we'll find out a few years from now. Children in Generation COVID seem slower to develop. Babies born during the pandemic vocalize and interact verbally much less than their pre-COVID counterparts did. Was it lack of exposure to the outside world? Increased screen time even for them? Mask wearing that covered our faces? My friend took her 1.5-year-old to the doctor during the pandemic, and they asked the typical questions that a pediatrician asks, one of which was, how does he do with strangers? My friend said, I have no idea. You are the first stranger he has ever met. We know that months of quarantine recalibrated how Americans earn, shop, invest, and save, the article said. Work has moved toward home. Now, there are some great benefits to working from home. We no longer have to spend hours a day commuting. We can live where it's cheaper, more beautiful, or where we have more space. But do we work from home, or do we live at work? Sometimes it's hard to tell. The Great Resignation has caused a remaking of the American labor force. Wages have gone up in the lowest paid sectors, and it's really hard to find people to fill those jobs. We've learned about the fragility of the American supply chain. We've had to pay attention to how long it will take to get new appliances, what foods are on the grocery shelves, and which medications are in critically short supply. Family ties have improved, the article said. Spending quality and quantity time with those who matter most became a priority. There is an increase in multi-generational homes. And yet, at the same time, the family ties of our country have come unraveled. We are a country divided. When the Pew Research Company surveyed people in 17 countries, Americans were the most likely to say that their society was split along partisan, racial, religious, and ethnic lines. And misinformation runs rampant, which makes the divisions even greater. You know, in a way, this isn't surprising, and I'll tell you why. We have been through a collective trauma. And collective trauma follows a pattern. Whether it's 9/11 or an earthquake, a flood or a pandemic, there's a pattern that a community goes through. Now, maybe it's easier if I show you. Thank you. So when a disaster or a trauma impacts a community, first we experience a range of emotions on the impact of this event. Shock, panic, confusion, disbelief, self-preservation. And when the initial shock subsides, When the initial shock subsides, we see some heroic behavior. People respond with great acts of altruism. Here we aren't assessing our own risks. In this stage, we are just rushing out to help others, to put out the fires, to search the rubble, to be of immediate use. Then comes the honeymoon phase. The community actually bonds together during this time. There's a sense of optimism and that we're in it together. Remember, we were making homemade masks and sending them to nurses? Remember the car parades for the workers at Stop and Shop? This was the honeymoon phase. We really did feel like we were all in it together. But with all community trauma, there comes a time of disillusionment. When the insurance checks take too long to come in and we realize how much isn't going to be covered. Or we figure out that the government doesn't have it all under control. We realize that, hey, some people are still having parties instead of isolating. Some people are starting to refuse to wear masks. We get discouraged. We realize that this is going to take years to come back from. We get stressed. We feel abandoned. We're exhausted in this stage. And we might be reaching for unhealthy coping mechanisms. Because in this stage, we reach new lows and trigger events happen, reminders of the event that bring us right back to that spot. And those are hard. What does this period look like? Well, for teenagers, it might be acting out or rebellion. At school, there might be fighting or loss of interest, attention-seeking behaviors. For little ones, it might look like regression and bedwetting, separation anxiety, nightmares. With adults, with all of us, it might look like physical problems like headaches and stomach aches, loss of interest or engagement, turning to drugs or alcohol, hypervigilance, isolation, exhaustion, depression or sadness, anxiety and fear, irritability and anger. Are any of these ringing a bell? Loss of appetite or turning to food for comfort, memory loss or lack of concentration, sleep disruptions, mood swings. But we don't stay there. thankfully. At some point, with help, we move on into a period of reconstruction and regeneration. So, what does this look like? Well, it looks like the passage of time and some hard work. This goes more quickly if we have a willingness to heal, if we accept support from others. Mindfulness helps and can rewire our brains. Physical exercise helps and getting back into a routine. Celebrating wins, even the small ones, helps. Marking anniversaries, like we are doing today, although anniversaries can bring anniversary reactions too. They can bring us right back down. This stage moves along more when we can be patient and kind with one another, when we offer each other grace and compassion. It helps to focus on what we can control and let go some of what we have no control over. It helps if we take care of ourselves, cook real food, get fresh air and sunshine, get dressed every day. Communicate to friends and family what we are going through and what would help. It helps to connect during this time with reliable and official sources of information. Avoid rumors and hype. Unplug from the news when necessary. Now here's the thing. We're not all on the same timetable with this map. Simplified, it looks like this, but alongside each other, it looks like this. So inevitably, there's going to be some disconnects and points of friction, even within close-knit faith communities like ours, but especially across a whole country. So where are we now? We're in the reconstruction period of this chart. We are in the working through grief and meaning-making stage of our collective trauma. And the only way that we heal as a community is if we engage in this part of the work. Not if we pretend it didn't happen or try to get right back to the way things always were, but by creating new beginnings. Thank you. I called today's service Lessons from a Pandemic. And AARP was not my only source of wisdom for today's sermon, although it helped. I also had all of you. And I asked you, what have you learned from this pandemic? Answering this question was a meaning-making exercise for our community, a way to move forward on our healing journeys by making sense of what we've been through. Here's how you answered. You said, during the pandemic, I have learned that modern connectivity technology, which I had previously been resistant to, can help us to maintain community and create new friendships and strengthen old bonds, sometimes even more than when we can be together in person. I have learned that seemingly small gestures, someone dropping off a treat at my doorstep, or me sharing homemade soup with others, can go a long way toward reducing isolation. I was reminded how important our essential workers actually are and how much we took for granted that medical and emergency professionals would be there when we needed them, that the shelves in the stores would be stocked, and that we are all interconnected. You said, I learned that isolation is bad for my health, Being a senior, I now understand the importance of social interactions. I now believe that we humans are not supposed to be alone or isolated. It feels good to be breaking that old mold as we once again move out of our isolation and begin to socialize again. You said, I have learned to value mindfulness, slowing down and being in the moment, letting go of the what ifs. Deep breathing has become my best friend. You said, the physical isolation drove me crazy. However, the pandemic led to the creation of the poetry workshop that I am now a part of, and this has been life-changing. You said, I learned that Zoom can be more intimate than in-person gatherings. We are participating in groups worldwide from our living rooms, and we can take wonderful courses without using a drop of gas. I think Zoom deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. You said, I learned to truly listen and trust that still small voice within, and that being true to myself is not only essential to me, but also a gift to those around me. You said, I missed singing. Oh, how dreadful it would be if it were to stop. So I learned how to sing outside, and it was joyous. You've said, I learned how saying hello on the street matters, how important groceries are, clerks are, truckers are, farmers are, how isolation confronts you with what it's like to be around yourself, makes room for self-reflection, how unequally impacted by the pandemic we were worldwide, how to engage less in palliative shopping. You said, what have I learned? To be grateful, to be joyful, to be silent, to listen, to be kind, to be thankful each day, each minute, each hour. You said, what I learned from these past 3 years is that in times of social crisis, there is an unfortunate increase in all kinds of hate. Yeah, hate's not new to us, but the pandemic seemed to mark a period in our collective experience that has been filled with fear, mistrust, and division. I think that it will be remembered as a time that tested our ability to be civil with one another and challenged the various institutions tasked with keeping us safe and upholding the rule of law and democracy itself. You said, my personal lesson is not to give up and surrender to the forces of hate, but instead to double down on advocacy, kindness, and hope. You said, the pandemic has helped me to see what is most essential. I choose to live more simply, valuing the time I had during the pause. I need that pause to slow myself down. I'm more aware now of what I desire and what I most love. The pandemic reminded me of the essentialness of spending time each day in the natural world. My spirit depends on it. You said, my children all called more often, probably afraid that I would die without their knowledge. And you said, a gift of the pandemic was my confidence in my own resilience that built during that time. You said, I have learned to appreciate things more. I have learned to appreciate hugs and social interactions, to appreciate Zoom and technology after being phobic about it for so long. You said, I have also learned the value of slowing down and the treasure of quiet time and solitude. I will never return to the frantic pace that I used to think was necessary. You said, I found my spiritual home at the UU Meetinghouse. Unexpectedly and gratefully, my spiritual growth since then has increased dramatically and excitingly. I can now stand up for myself and not just others. I see that it is a continuous path, not just a single epiphany. I am so grateful to have found the Meetinghouse. You said love can be felt across the miles, across the world, by sharing our stories. And hard times also bring along moments of miracles, growth, and opportunity. You said a personality can change radically when isolated. You said life continues no matter what. You said, I learned that it could all be taken away. Life is fragile, while at the same time, we are fierce. We are still processing the last 3 years. We are still making meaning of it. We are still healing. And although we are not all at the same stage on the journey of trauma recovery, we are on this path alongside each other. It makes it harder at times when we're not in alignment with those around us, but it also means that we are not alone. And when we are able to see that we are not alone, and when we are able to process things together, our communities can become stronger than they were before the crisis, the event, the trauma. It doesn't always work that way, but it can. You know, I kind of came to depend on Lynn Unger's poetry during the pandemic. I used her poems during worship. I read them on my own. I reread them. So when I heard that Lynn was crowdfunding to support a new book of poetry, I donated immediately. It meant that I would be one of the first to get her book when it was published, and that it would even be signed by her. I got it in the mail a few months ago. It's called The Brittle Beauty of It All. And on the inside cover, in Lynn's handwriting, it said, "To Kate, wishing you endless moments of beauty." Now, reading through the new book, I noticed that her new poems were not all as hopeful and positive as that first one that we used as our opening reading. The pandemic has changed her too. I realize, like the rest of us, she's not in the honeymoon phase anymore. But her poems still contained hope, though a harder won version of it. The last poem in the book is called The Way Through, and I'd like to end with it. The way through. If we're going to be honest, it's hard to see a pathway out of this. Empathy might not be dead, but discord and division have so overgrown the field, it's hard to imagine a way to harvest peace. Of course, there's always counting on a miracle. It works in the movies, although the truth is clearly that miracles, by their very nature, are not to be relied on. Except, of course, that the caterpillar carries beneath its green skin tiny fragments of what will become the monarch butterfly's wings. The azure dragonflies that you see at play by any pond or lake or stream are an echo from 300 million years ago, when their giant ancestors stormed the skies. The minerals in your bones aren't different than the limestone where those fossils are found. I'm not saying it's all going to be joy and delight. I'm saying that life is long and complicated, and we belong to a family that has found a million ways to thrive. May it be so. Amen and blessed be.
It has become our practice to pose a question based on the theme of the service each week. It can be a topic of sharing at coffee hour today or later with friends. If you want to delve deeper into this conversation, we hope you can join us Tuesday at 5 on our Zoom coffee hour. Our question this week is, what have you learned from the pandemic? What have you learned from the pandemic?
I'll end with these closing words. May we remember those early lessons of kindness and hope. May our eyes remain open to the inequities and the work it will take to close them. May our hearts remain open to the connections, for they are, in the end, what saves us. Go in peace.